In No Time to Die, James Bond faces a dilemma at the end of the film. The chemical weapons are sealed in a World War II-era bunker, and the arms dealers are on their way to collect them. The Royal Navy has launched a missile strike to destroy the base, but the blast doors have been closed by our villain. Bond is faced with a ticking clock. Open the doors so that the missiles strike, destroying the weapons once and for all before the arms dealers can carry them away for all sorts of inevitably nefarious ends. But there's one problem here. The ticking clock, those incoming missiles, is completely fictitious. And it makes all the tension of what should be an epic climax to Daniel Craig's time in the role feel very hollow and pointless. The ticking clock is a very common motif in storytelling. Writers use it to create tension and urgency within a story. Do X before Y or Z will happen. It's a fantastically simple and easy to employ formula for ramping up the stakes in your story and can be applied across multiple genres. Can Ross get to the plane before Rachel leaves? Can Harry destroy all the Horcruxes before Voldemort's plan comes to fruition? Can Shrek reach Fiona before the potion wears off? Will they get everybody off the bus before it runs out of fuel? Will the ships fall for Joker's plan and destroy the other before their time limit expires? Endless numbers of films, books and plays employ a ticking clock to ramp up the story and the pace within. What the ticking clock allows you to do is to set a limit. Don't let the name fool you though, because it doesn't even have to be an actual timer. It can be any deadline that once passed has irreversible consequences, and we want to see if our protagonist will make it in time. What they allow you to do is establish clear stakes that define what is at risk and what actions are needed. This gives our narrative much more focus and helps invest our reader more fully into the story. It makes the pages turn faster as we're desperate to see if the protagonist will succeed or not. More than that, they give people motivation to do things. If the Germans weren't looking for the Ark of the Covenant, then Indiana might not even bother to search for it himself.
And right now, apparently, there's some kind of German archaeological dig going on in the desert outside of Cairo.
Now, we've got some information here, but we can't make anything out of it, and maybe you can. Tanis development proceeding. Acquire headpiece, staff of Ra.
If Sauron weren't actively moving against the Free Peoples, then the Council of Elrond could have spent another 6 months talking about their plan. Ticking clocks are great devices for pushing things to happen, for kickstarting a quest or getting a character underway.
4 people are sitting around a table, talking about baseball, whatever you like. 5 minutes of it, very dull. Suddenly, a bomb goes off, blows the people to smithereens. What do the audience have? 10 seconds of shock. Now take the same scene and tell the audience there is a bomb under that table and will go off in 5 minutes. Well, the whole emotion of the audience is totally different because you've given them that information. That in 5 minutes' time, that bomb will go off. Now the conversation about baseball becomes very vital because they're saying to you, don't be ridiculous, stop talking about baseball, there's a bomb under there. You've got the audience working. Now the only difference is, although I've been guilty of, in the picture Sabotage, of making this error, but I've never made it since, the bomb must never go off. Because if you do, you work that audience into a state, and then they'll get angry because you haven't provided them with any relief. And that's almost a must. So a foot touches the bomb, somebody looks down and says, my God, a bomb, out of the window, then it goes off, just in time.
But how do we implement them well? How do we make sure that they don't come across as contrived or forced? Let's come back to Bond for this. First and foremost, the clock needs to be realistic. The reader needs to believe that this could feasibly happen, and that the actions undertaken by the character are the only possible choices in that scenario, as well as being in line with our character's personality. At the end of No Time to Die, our clock is established. Missiles are coming, doors need opening, arms dealers are on the way, and Bond needs to open the doors before the missiles arrive, or the bad guys win. Except, that's not really true. We're told that the missiles will bounce off the doors if he fails, but these are cruise missiles from the 21st century warship against World War II era bunker doors, so that probably won't happen. We're told the arms dealers are coming, but given no reason why the warship can't destroy them instead and call off the missile strike so Bond can take all the time he wants to open them from a second strike. It's common knowledge that warships carry more than a handful of missiles, and we're only shown a couple of boats heading to the island. Why couldn't the ship just destroy them and buy Bond more time? You might point out that Bond is infected, so him leaving the island isn't all that important and he'll want to die anyway, but this seems horribly out of character for a man we know to be full of resilience, perseverance and self-control. Are we really meant to believe that he'll have no choice but to throw himself on Mandolin and Mathilde when he knows full well that it'll kill them? Probably not. The problem we run into here is that the ticking clock is completely fabricated and contrived by the writer, not by the characters or the story we've seen. The writers want there to be a clock that forces Bond to sacrifice himself, that creates urgency and tension at the end. But the issue is that it's just not realistic, in line with the character, or natural to everything we've seen in a film that was pretty good and consistent up to the final third, where story beats were forced into place. The second point here also applies to Bond, is that the ticking clock needs to be integrated into the story naturally. Great ways to do this would be a race against another character to achieve the same end. Competition is a very natural thing that motivates and pushes people forward. Having opposing factions, like in Indiana Jones, chase the same object is a great way to establish urgency and pace. It has the bonus effect of being very compelling for character development as we see what lengths a person will go to in order to beat the clock. In James Bond, everybody's on the same side. The warship, Bond, Mathilde, MI6, and everybody except the arms dealers want the same resolution. They don't want Bond to die. Instead, the ticking clock forces this to happen when the solution is right in front of us. Alternatively, we can have characters race against the force of nature, such as the asteroid in Armageddon, but it should go without saying that you do need to do research on this point to make sure the race and the solutions are realistic. So perhaps Armageddon isn't the best example here. So something like The Revenant, where Hugo Glass is pushing against time before nature kills him, and before his former hunting mate, who left him for dead, is well beyond reach. Realistic and integrated into the story, as it should be. Similarly, the conclusion of the clock can't be too convenient or rushed. Establish rules and constraints early in the story that will prevent characters from choosing quick ways out, as well as necessitating the sacrifices or hard decisions to solve it. Make use of foreshadowing, and ensure that your character is the one to solve the problem, in line with their personality and skills. Again, James Bond is shown to be resourceful, resilient, and full of creative, quick-witted solutions. This is shown in the very same movie, so suddenly it smacks of inconsistency when his brain suddenly stops to work right at the end, when we're pretty sure, as we've seen before, that he could have found solutions to the problems he's in. Don't just magic up abilities either that haven't been established or reinforced, such as Teddy's miraculous abilities to fly planes with no training just to solve an immediate writing problem, like what happened in The Dial of Destiny. The solutions to problems aren't always going to be neat and tidy either. Sometimes they will demand a cost or have unexpected outcomes, like Marty McFly altering his family's financial situation by accident. Or maybe the solution requires collaboration with unsavoury bedfellows, like Katniss Everdeen forming an alliance with Peter. These elements add complexity and originality to your ticking clock. It's harder to write because you have to think more about the threads you're creating, but it's also far more entertaining and rewarding for your reader when you do it right. This is something that the writers of No Time to Die forgot to do. Their solution is all too neat and tidy. It would have been far better if Bond had survived the missile strikes and then had to deal with the issue of not being able to touch the woman and the child that he loves. Far more compelling, far more entertaining. And so here comes another point that's worth mentioning, that you do need to be careful about being too cliché with your use of the clock. Everybody these days expects the, "I didn't make it. Oh wait, yes I did," trope that is so often applied to the ticking clock, like we see in Friends, where Ross thinks he's lost his only love, only to find out that he did actually beat the clock. It's okay for a cheap pull on the heartstrings, but it's very predictable. Instead, something like Philomena employs the clock in a subtler way, in that we're not sure if the titular character and Martin will uncover everything before the trail goes too cold about her son. When the timer runs out, the twist is compelling and sets up the second half of the story. I won't spoil it for you, as the film is excellent and worth watching, but it allows us to see the consequences of the clock play out in unexpected ways. We should try to subvert the expectations around the use of time limits, so that our reader can't automatically predict what will happen the moment the clock is introduced. Again, Bond disarms the laser within 7 seconds to spare in previous films, but Frank Drebin trips over the wire and unplugs the bomb by accident. One is predictable, the other is amusing in how it foils the clock. Try to be unpredictable, and make the story more interesting for your reader. So, when we use a ticking clock, it becomes a heartbeat of our story, a pulse of urgency and a focus for our character that is so incredibly important to get right. Make it realistic, with understandable stakes, and maybe even a twist or two thrown in for good measure. Think about Ethan Hunt clinging to the side of the train trying to stop it in time, or Luke firing his torpedo moments before devastation, or Sarah Connor fighting to prevent the end of the world before it becomes inevitable. You need to infuse your clock with purpose, ensure it resonates with the core beliefs and struggles of your characters, and let it amplify their desperation while making the reader believe the consequences are very real. Don't let the clock be arbitrary and contrived to artificially create tension like in Batman vs Superman. Invest energy into creating the tension that naturally fits with the story like in Aliens. Don't cloud your climax with nonsensical action and cliché twists like in Transformers, but instead make it meaningful and memorable like the destruction of the ring. If you do all this, then your clock will enhance the story, rather than waste all the potential just for superficial tension.